Hi, everyone. Welcome to Google. My name is Satyajeet Salgar. I'm really excited to welcome all of you to the Chicago booth event, along with the Center for Applied AI. I lead product and UX for an applied AI team. It's called AI Innovation and Research. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Sanjog Misra for a presentation here. Sanjog is I need to get this right, Charles H. Kellstadt Distinguished Service Professor of Marketing and Applied AI. He's got an amazing presentation for us, and after that, we'll have a conversation. Thank you for everyone that submitted questions. I'll kick things off with some of that, and then we'll do some live Q&A. Does that sound like a good plan? All right. All right. With that, please join me in welcoming Professor Misra.
Cool. Okay, so this is going to be a short presentation, then we'll get into a conversation. Okay, just to level set, we're talking about AI. I like this definition. Right? This is an old definition about what we think AI is, but today's conversation is going to be predominantly on the generative AI piece, which is anything special about this picture? No, it's just a local artist that I just found and took a snapshot. But let me start you off by just telling you a little bit about the center, and then Emily's here, there's Lauren's here. We're happy to chat more about it. But the center's predominant kind of mission is to kind of service three big components at Booth. Obviously, faculty and research. That's the primary goal, is to support research. But more recently, we've engaged with students, bringing in workshops, speakers, or any of you who are in the AI space and want to kind of come back and talk to students, please let us know. We'd love to have you. And alums, right? Events like these, we've done a few in New York, in Mumbai. We're going to do some more in Singapore. So we're trying to kind of generate kind of a community around AI. So thanks for being here. So any questions you have, please shoot us, an email or just reach out to us. We're happy to ask questions. Okay. What I thought I'd do is just give you a lay of the land about what's going on at Booth with respect to AI. So before I get into, and I'll focus more on research just to get you an idea of how we think about AI. But, all of you have been through kind of the Kool-Aid machine that is Booth. And we usually say things like, Booth teaches you how to think, right? Booth is mostly about like dealing with information, trying to make good decisions using information. And as kind of new technologies and new ideas emerge, the faculty also try and kind of adapt and try and understand, should we change the way we think and the way we communicate about a particular topic. And I'm going to give you examples around AI as to what Booth faculty are doing. But quickly, we've obviously got new courses on AI that are coming up. I teach a course on generative AI at Booth. We're building up an AI group of faculty at Booth. It's going to be the first new faculty group since the behavioral science group that Richard Taylor built. And then generally, like I was telling somebody this stat, when I joined Booth, maybe there were about 5 or 7 faculty who were interested in AI. Today, it's well over 50% of all faculty, right? So there's across disciplines, as with anything. So on that note, I'm going to give you some examples. And what you should see is it's not the typical applications that you would think, right? We're not trying to use AI to predict things better, or we're not trying to generate content or summarize things. The faculty are trying to do something fundamentally different, think differently. So for example, here's a paper that literally rethinks competition. That's the way I see this paper. What's the point here? Well, we've had traditional ways in economics of thinking about competition. And now with the new technologies, we can redefine our metrics around competition. So in this paper, you're looking at patent overlap, right? So if I have 2 firms merging and they've got, a stock of patents, turns out that when they merge, they are supposed to divest some of those overlapping patents. So Tom Woolman, who's a faculty member at Booth in the micro group, basically is looking at overlaps in patent space using embeddings, and then looking to see whether or not people are following kind of the spirit of the law in terms of divesting patents. More generally, this faculty at Booth rethinking how you define competition, right? So you can imagine using the technology to look at design overlaps, for example. Like, are you competing in the design space? Or so it's no longer like, oh, our market shares kind of interact with each other or we are in some regression. We can rethink the very nature of competition, and hopefully that'll lead to policy implications and so on. So that's on fundamental economics and thinking about competition. You come to finance, right? So Ralph Hodgson is a professor of finance. And the idea that kind of he with Xavier and a bunch of others are looking at is to say, hey, the same way English has structure, portfolios and investments also have structure. So can we use kind of the same idea of understanding language and coming up with embeddings to represent language? Can we generate an embedding space for assets? Right? And what that gives you is kind of measures of similarity in the asset space, but also in investor space. And that allows you to do new kinds of measurements in finance that we've never been able to do before. Right? So again, it's not taking kind of existing stuff, but literally building up new ways of implementing things. Believe it or not, the hottest area in terms of AI is accounting. In fact, I'll just leave it at that. But you can see why, right? It's accounting traditionally is all about reports and it's information stored in text. And now you have access to a technology that allows you to kind of glean out that information and do novel new things with it, right? And so people like Bradford Levy, are building up new, or kind of completely pre-training new architectures which are designed to rethink the way we think of informational surprise, or looking at kind of the information content that is embedded inside kind of the filings that firms have, and what can we do with that. So that's all I know about accounting, by the way. But it's not just that. There's also incredibly detailed technical innovations going at Booth. So Teng Yuan, who's a co-author, but also kind of that's learning theory, kind of had this point. So diffusion models are the models that we build images with, right? So the idea is to take an image, add noise, and then have a denoising process that gets you back an image. Once you build that architecture up, then you can just take noise and say, hey, give me a picture of a beach, and it'll generate an image of a beach. What Teng Yuan and his co-authors kind of figured out is the technology that's being used currently is highly inefficient, right? So they worked out the math. This is a theory paper, but shows that second order kind of effects or second order kind of information that's in these structures can be used to make the process way more efficient. So there's technical stuff going on. Then there's people like me, right? Who are, I wear two hats, one as a marketing professor, one as applied AI. And here again, we're trying to rethink how marketing works. So this is a project in partnership with a startup called Persado, where we took 20 to 30,000 A/B tests and said, hey, can we build a language model? And we stole one from Google, like the T5, teeny tiny, 175 million parameter. Teeny tiny is 175 million, by the way, these days. And we trained that, but with two goals in mind. You want to generate marketing messages, but at the same time, also give me performance guarantees that say, this is the click-through rate, this will be the conversion rate. And the architecture has to do both at the same time. Right? And it turns out, if you spend $4,000 on Google Colab, you can beat ChatGPT. Most of my other research is on kind of technical stuff related to deep learning. I won't bore you with that. What I do want to talk about for the next few minutes that I have is an idea that hopefully some of you will find controversial and bothersome and will harass me for it. And it's this idea that it's kind of taken hold quite a bit. So we've always been interested in kind of talking to, computers. Then this thing comes along, and then this thing comes along. And at some point, we realize that if these language models are big enough, they do things that we don't expect them to do. One of the things is this, right? So there's this new push in the social sciences to say, can AI actually replace humans? These are published papers, by the way, in prestigious journals. And I'll show you a bunch of examples. And so the way they do this is they'll go to GPT or to Gemini or to Claude, and then they'll run a battery of tests and say, hey, look, these engines are responding the way humans do, and the correlation is extremely high. And so therefore, Well, we can generate data from these and use it as if we were generating it from humans, right? It's in economics, in the social sciences more generally, sociology, political science. And there's companies out there, right? Will do this for you, user research without the users, and they're trusted by companies like Google. Also Intel. I know there's somebody from Intel here as well.
Don't forget that.
Yeah, and Pepsi too. That's true. And there's like these comments like, oh, we're going to have these models, or we have these models where we can just ask this language model to tell us what a human would have told us. Okay. For marketing research. So, and if you want, nowadays this is how we do literature reviews. We just go ask GPT, it's like, what do you think? And it tells us. That's the consensus right now. Okay. So I just want you to think about, by the way, I'm required to show you a little bit of math. It's a booth talk. So here it goes. So this is what we typically do, right? So we take a query, a question, whatever you want to call it, a prompt. We shove it into this foundation model. So it could be a language model, but it could be something else. And then something comes up, a response, a data, right? Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because we want to learn something about something, right? And so the idea is I can take this data that I've generated, shove it into something, and then I learn something about this other thing that I cared about. I'm going to call that theta, right? It could be anything. It could be trying to learn something about a construct, about an idea, but in my case, it's just some value that I care about. Okay, what's the problem in doing this? So just to level set what I'm talking about. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to go into GPT or Gemini and say, hey, give me a data set of responses for people who are of this type. And it'll generate a data set. And you take that data set and you do whatever you were taught in regression 101 at Booth, right? And you learn something. And I'm trying to articulate why this whole approach of doing it is problematic. First, where the heck did the query come from? Where did your question start? You must have had some idea of what it was that you cared about, right? So that's what generates the prompt that you wrote down. You had some idea in your head, you wrote down a prompt, then you got some response, and you went with that. It turns out that's kind of what we do and this is why people are thinking of this as the same process. That's exactly what we do with research. We have some idea, we run a survey, we collect some data, and then from that data, we learn something, right? And it seems like we can do that with language models. So what's the problem? There's a bunch of problems. And so like the way I solve it is I write some math down, and then I do this, and I do that. Okay, so what's the point? This. We have three sources of information to learn something. The first is what I'll call priors. Just something that, if I asked you, what's the price of a Tesla, you just give me a number, right? You have some prior information, right? If I wanted some more, detail, then you could go and collect some data, maybe from some experts, or you could do a survey. That's human data. Now we have this new source of data, foundation models, language models, whatever you want to call them. And the question is, how do we combine all of these to learn something about the thing that we cared about? The problem is the following. I just told you that you can't use the foundation model without having a prior. So what do? You write a question, some information, some response comes out of the language model. And everybody knows if you've ever used GPT or Gemini or Claude, the first time you ask a question, the answer that comes back is crap. And then you do something called prompt engineering. You change your questions to get the answer that looks good. Well, that's conforming to your prior. So you're rejecting data to make the data that you do get look like the data that you want it to look like. In research, we call that cheating, right? But you're encouraged to do that. So think about what's happening. So the data that you're getting is not data, it's just what you want it to be. And if you did it enough, you just get exactly what you expected. Now, at some point you say, no, that's not what I would do, but there's no other way of going through this process. You have to inject your own priors into this process. That's one problem. The second problem is, well, what do these models do? We have no clue. Google has no clue how these things work, right? OpenAI doesn't know how it works. So in order to use anything that these models generate, you have to have an understanding of where it's coming from. We don't. So it's just a black box spitting something out, and you hope to God that it's correct. And you hope that it represents the same type of features that the human data generated. The third problem with this approach is once you sit back and just think about it, if you truly thought of the stuff coming out of foundation models as data, you would never, ever need human data. Right? Because I have infinite amounts of data I can generate from the language model. And so any human data, if I try to put it in there, it'll just get swamped. Because human data is actually finite. So human data is worthless if you believe that the foundation models actually give you data. So therefore, after all some analysis, here's my main point. Anything that comes out of a generative model is by definition subjective. Each one of you with the same idea can get different data. And why? Because your prompt, your ideas, your priors will generate that data. So it is subjective, which means don't do this. Don't use it as data. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that this is truly dangerous. There's other reasons why you shouldn't do this, but if you start using this as data, you're going to get into a really bad place. They're still informative, right? It's not that there's not information stored in this language model. It's truly information, but how you use it requires you to use your own judgment. So think of it as you have a really, really good advisor who can generate a ton of information for you. You still have to decide how much you want to trust this advisor, right? You can't trust this advisor completely because if you did, then there's nothing to learn at that point. You've learned everything. You can't completely ignore them because if you did that, then you're losing all the benefits of having this. But the way you kind of weigh these things is completely up to you. Okay? So just to wrap this up, if my message is like, generative outcomes out of these models are subjective. You shouldn't think of them as data. They're still informative and they'll work for certain tasks. You have to just be careful what you're trying to do with it. And the best way to use it is to have your subjective judgment of how useful this is and then use it in that way. Okay, that's in a nutshell what I wanted to talk about. So short little presentation just to get you thinking about generative AI slightly differently. And I'll hand it back to
I think maybe now we'll just do some Q&A. I've got some questions that some of you have seated, and then as we have time, we can sort of do some live questions. All right, so let me start with, we'll get to live questions in a bit, right? So let me start with some of the questions. I guess let me start with the obvious one, which is all the MBAs in the room over here. As we live in this new world, what do you think of how do you think of an MBA education as we sort of think about this world of AI? And
big question, right? Yeah. So one of the, I'll give you a small example of like a choice that we had to make, right? So I was on the policy committee at Booth, and one of the things we had to decide is what do we do with GPT? Mm-hmm. Everybody has access to it. Wharton had at that point just put out this announcement that it was not going to allow GPT to be used in classrooms. And there was a sentiment in some faculty that says, yeah, we should also have a policy that, don't use language models because it's not quite right. There's a couple of us who fought that idea completely, right? And the point was, you cannot stop this technology. People are going to use it. It's like, it's like stopping calculator. Like, good luck with that, right? People are going to use the technology. And you're better off kind of changing the way you teach than asking students to kind of not use this technology, right? Now, that's difficult because, so I was talking to Randy Cosner, I don't know if any of you have taken a course with Randy. His assignment is, here's an article, summarize it. Right? That's not going to work, obviously. So, I mean, like, okay, what assignment would work? Well, it would be like, summarize this using a language model and find kind of flaws in it. Or like, so I'll give you an example. Like my first assignment in the generative AI classes, I tell students, convince GPT that a calculator is an AI device. That takes about 45 minutes. Wow. Like you should try it, right? If you go to GPT and say, is the calculator an AI device? It's going to say, no, it's not. Your job is to make it say it, right? And not by just saying, hey, repeat after me, right? But by actually convincing it by argument. And it's an interesting exercise. You can try that with Gemini, you can try it with Claude. But there's ways of teaching, I think, that we have to fundamentally shift,
Yeah.
right? Without which, it's just like once students graduate, they're going to be in a world where the technology is real. So
Are there at Booth now? Are there ways people are applying it to like different subjects like marketing or finance, or what are you seeing with?
So there's kind of the classroom stuff,
Yeah.
and then there is kind of non-classroom stuff. So for example, most of you know what the NVC is, right? The New Venture Challenge.
Everyone raise their hand if you know what NBC is. All right.
Yeah, okay. So this year, about 70% of the NVC startups are AI related, right? And it shouldn't come as a surprise, right?
What are the other 30%?
Right. Yeah, and obviously we also know out of those 70%, like, more than half will fail anyway. So, but no, there's a huge push on the AI side in terms of doing stuff with it. I think if you went into the classroom, but I'm a little weird. My class is generative AI, so I expect people to use it. I encourage them, and that the whole idea is to kind of break it in some sense, to find new ways of thinking about it and so on. But almost like there's classes in finance, there's classes in marketing, there's classes in operations that are now using some generative AI kind of tool or some AI tool to kind of supplement the curriculum, without which it would seem odd not to have that in, right? So I think there's individual faculty kind of, and then there are specialized courses, like there's AI with finance, there's an accounting class with AI in it, specifically around generative AI.
That's awesome.
There's a bunch of stuff going on.
All right. So before we get to live questions, I'm going to get through some of the questions some of you submitted online. So thank you for that. So I guess maybe sort of shifting up broader, right? Like especially as you think about people in the corporate world, what do you think are the most promising applications that you're seeing right now for AI that are sort of in like the corporate work that you see or you do? Or you can start.
Yeah. So I have this in my head. I have this framework to think about like generative AI, right? So the current things I think of is this lower quadrant. Think of it as there's knowledge on one axis, like how much knowledge are you bringing to the table, and the other is structure of the grammar, if you will, right? So the current stuff is, let's say, this left corner, which is Claude, Gemini, OpenAI stuff, right? This on this corner. Let's go to the other extreme, right? So there's a company called Evozyne that came out of University of Chicago research, not Booth, but in the biomedical sciences, and they're building a language model for basically for protein, right? So basically taking the double helix, unzipping it, and they're literally creating a language model for like all those mnemonics that you have in there. And they're funded by the Gates Foundation and NVIDIA and a bunch of others. And their applications are to, can we make the cassava plant 3 degrees more resistant to heat? Because if not, there's going to be massive amounts of food shortages in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So I think I call those de novo models. Like there's a bunch of companies out there. That's just one example of doing something fundamentally new and different with this technology that we had never thought possible, right? So even the learning process with this model, they have a wet lab, the AI comes up with ideas, it's a reinforcement learning in real life, right? So those of you know what that is. That's there. But then there's a bunch of applications on the knowledge dimension, right? Which is to say, take the current stuff, and I have proprietary knowledge. So one of a Booth alum is Alex Singler, who runs all of AI at McKinsey, right? So you can imagine all of the collateral that McKinsey has, that's proprietary, only McKinsey has it. Now you can bring that into some kind of a RAG system. You guys know what a RAG is, I'm assuming, like retrieval augmented generation. So it's like, the language model now interfacing with actual knowledge. There's a ton, as you know, there's a ton of applications of that. Semantic search, like there's a ton of those things that people are doing, like where you can do conversational search. I think somebody was mentioning that right here. So that's on the knowledge dimension. And then there's the style dimension, right? That's all the fun stuff, if you will, right? Like can I change the grammar? Can I make the art look like this versus that?
Yep.
So that's my framework of thinking about it. I think the most compelling things are on that de novo front, where we are pushing into new things. I mean, maybe you should talk about like the stuff going on at Google around this stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe even like sort of stepping back, right? Which is, I think there's when I see the first version of that question asked, like I think it's people see like, all right, which startups get disrupted and like what changes, what jobs go away, right? I think I think there's the short term and the long term, right? So I think there's this essay that the CEO of Anthropic, Gary Amadei, wrote, which is it's I think the title is "Machines of Loving Grace."
Right.
It's a very long version. The short version is, even in the most sort of pessimistic scenario, the way to think about it is, if you think about the progress we've made in the last 100 years, the curve we're on suggests that will now happen in the next 10. Right. So, and this is, by the way, the expected base case, right? Which is, and then think about what life was like 100 years ago, right? Think about what the world was like, just how we got to places, how we think about our futures. Forget computers, right? Or the internet. None of that existed, and 10 years is not that long, right? If you think about sort of our working lives and all of that stuff, right? That is the level of disruption that's going to happen, right? So what does that mean for jobs and how we work and the materials we have? And so I think when you have that frame, you suddenly feel like, okay, I'm not that worried about this particular thing being sort of being faster. On the other hand, as your paper sort of pointed out, I think what we're currently on is, you think about the internet as democratizing access. I think now we're sort of saying, you're democratizing intelligence. And so if everyone has more intelligence, what are the kinds of things you can do, right? And in the short term, it means think about, so I'm a product manager, right? So when I think about all the jobs associated, whoa, what just happened? Something crashed. All right. So it would be nice if I could just, tell that computer, hey, can you fix that? And it would know what that means. It would interpret it. It would say, all right, it means I need to reboot that browser. I might need to do something else, and it would just do it, right? We're not that far away from that happening,
right?
But I think in general, to your point, I think all these, my job involves doing a bunch of data analysis, doing a bunch of user research, then making sure mocks happen, making sure prototyping happens. The tools now exist for all of that to be done by one person really quickly in an automated way. It hasn't happened yet, right? Tools, the chain isn't there, but I feel like that job looks dramatically different in a year. And so I think each of us, if we sort of look at our workflows, we'll say okay, if I had intelligence, what could I not do anymore and delegate? Right. And I think that to me is the most disruptive thing. That was a long-winded answer.
No, I completely.
I think that's where we're headed.
Agents in general, right?
Yes.
Having intelligent agents, I think is it's here already, but I think it's in a year, we're going to have it productized in a way that all of us can use it.
Right. I think right now to use them, you need a certain amount of sophistication, and honestly, just patience with these things. But that will change in time. So the other question actually is around disruption, which is the other question people had was, what should they worry about most? What are the things that are clearly going to be disrupted? What implication does that have for industries in the next year?
Trucking.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't know this, but there was a startup that I was advising called ZipRecruiter, and what I found out was 48 states out of the 50, trucking is the #1 job.
Yep.
And I understand there are lobbies, and I understand we have the technology today to automate trucking, right, in some sense.
Yeah.
It exists, right? And it won't happen for political reasons. It won't have, but at some point it will, because the economics of it will make it happen. And then the question is, what happens to all the people who drove the trucks, right? I think these small disruptions, or not small, but they're small, big disruptions in the sense you think about catalog companies, right? You needed models to put on a dress and then a photographer to take a picture. That's gone. I'm not so, and those are lots of people who, right? And so there's these little disruptions that are already occurring. And I think, I'm still optimistic because we've seen this before. Just having a conversation about this, it is like an industrial revolution. Electricity had the same impact, right? There were people who used to light up gas lamps. Those jobs don't exist, right? They had to do something different. So there will be disruptions which will be painful in certain sectors, but new things will also emerge.
Yeah, no, and I think the thing that you said about the modeling thing is interesting, right? You no longer need models to to like put clothes on, right? So a friend of mine runs a startup in food, and so if you see a picture of like food on a website, it is extremely likely it is AI generated at this point, right? And he pointed me to a whole bunch of retail sites, and he's like, yeah, those aren't real. We made them.
But the disruption there, what's fascinating is that there was a person who, let's say, you wanted like cake with frosting. The frosting was shaving cream.
Yeah.
Right? So it's basically like, because actual frosting wouldn't last, so they would use shaving cream, and there was a person who had expertise in doing this.
Yep.
That person now does not have a job, right?
Fun fact, apparently, like the cheese that you see and it's glue.
Yeah.
And so now it's AI generated pixels, right? So I think that's where we live in. All right, I think I'm supposed to start going to like live Q&A now.
Yeah.
So if folks want to start raising their hands, and we can go around the room. I thought there was a question.
I can call on people too.
Yeah. Hold on, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you were basically saying that these ChatGPT results are not data, but then the last thing that you didn't comment on was like, I reserve the right to change.
Yeah, that's not my standard.
Tell me about why.
Because so I've learned this the hard way. Like I taught the first version of, so when I was, last year was the first time I taught a generative AI class. And so like usually you prep, like and Emily will point this out, I'm a very last minute kind of person. So 1 week before, 2 weeks before is when I make slides. That did not work. I had to literally make slides the day off, because remember, this was like last November, right? And so like literally I would make slides up, and then OpenAI would release a new thing. And so now it's obsolete. And so you have to go back and change things. So while I understand like currently, like the current technology is not quite there in terms of generating synthetic data that I would treat as if it was data. But that's not to say that there's not going to be something new and different that will come up in the next, I don't know, 6 months or 6 years, which will make me change my mind. So now I just have this disclaimer. Anything I say is obsolete by the time I leave the room, right? Like it's on you to kind of keep track of what's going on.
Yeah.
But it's just what it is. Yeah.
Can you tell us about SaaS 2.0?
In terms of like software as a service SaaS or the company SaaS?
SaaS 2.0. What's going to happen to software as a service
Okay.
with AI?
When I heard SaaS, there's actually like, there's a company called SaaS also, which is not doing too well these days. But no, I think I don't really, so, I rode the SaaS wave myself. I was part of a startup. We got acquired. Things were great. I don't even know what that means right now. So and there's some people in the room I know who are investors and have invested in the AI boom. And a lot of them have not worked out. I think like this agentic type of frameworks, I think will redefine software as a service too, right? I just don't know how and when it will happen. And I also don't know what that platform will look like in some sense. I think it's going to be talking about democratizing things. I think the same thing will happen with software as a service. It's going to be like you can build your own service, right? I'll give you an example. I just recently, any of you use R, the software that some of you do, right? It's basically a statistical programming software, super hard to kind of do stuff with. But it turns out that somebody sat down and built like an interface to a language model for R. But even better, it allows you to generate a web app that does the stuff for you so that you don't code anything, right? And that literally web app can be deployed as a SaaS, offering. Anybody can do it, right? So it's a complicated question because I really don't know the answer to it. Like I think maybe.
No, I think we don't know as an answer for many things. I think that to your point, right, which is, I think at this point, a lot of what SaaS is standardizing tasks that lots of companies do and trying to do it in a scalable way so that it fits for that company. If you think about, if you use artifacts from Claude, like you can just say the words and certain applications get written, which is a lot of like if you think about, things like a lot of SaaS is, sort of doing employee reviews and CRM systems, all of that stuff. That can get generated now pretty easily.
Yeah.
Right? And there are lots of companies that are focused on that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. I think there are, if you ask people in the space, I've heard them say the bet is on data, the bet is on relationships, the bet is on that particular piece versus the coding part.
Yeah.
But I think the next couple of years will be pretty instructive on which way that'll go. Or
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
build on that question, I think that we should probably just like to have your thoughts as well. Look at the cost structure of a generative software company versus a traditional SaaS company. So you still have the same GTM, you still have to go to your customers to sell, right? Which is bigger cost structure of that company, for SaaS, any kind of software company. Then you're looking at, let's say, engineering cost is higher. You call API more often, the token is going to be more expensive. I mean, how do you price it? So I guess I'd love to hear anyone have any thoughts on that.
You want to go? You were talking about this
yeah,
time we were talking.
So I think in general you should assume. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the question was cost structures on SaaS, like GTM cost structures. It's dangerous to make predictions, and so I think this one is, and it's also not my area of expertise. But I think the things you can sort of bet on are costs in each of these cases will just keep going down over time. Right. So I think there's what it is today. Like a lot of people make decisions based on, oh, this is the price of like compute today. That you can reliably predict will just keep going down. And as computing moves to devices, that will go down even lower. So I think based on that, that would change the math on a lot of those things.
How about a talent team? Like, how does it mix up?
Yeah. So I think piggybacking on that. So there's two things, right? So there's like, I think of it as hardware and software. Think of people as software, right? So the hardware part, like funnily enough, like we just had a talk from this guy, Jonathan Frankel, who is at Databricks, and smart kid, now worth hundreds of millions because his company Mosaic ML got acquired.
Like you called him a kid.
He's a kid. He's like, he's 30. Very sharp. And his point of view is that there's a glut, right? So while it's kind of this weird world where we can't get our hands on GPUs, but at the same time, there's also a glut. And you can see this in the pricing of like GPU per hour. That's been going down for an H100, which we think is hard to get, right? And so right now, like, you know, there's companies here in the San Francisco area where you can get like a GPU hour at like $1.10, which is not what you pay at AWS, which is like $220 or $240, right? And those prices are going down. So I think hardware prices will go down, or like compute will become cheaper. Software on the compute side, like now, like, you know, Llama 3.1 is powerful, and I have heard a lot of people are just basically moving away and just, you know, going to Llama, right? And no offense to Gemini, but it's just what it is. The talent piece connects with the agentic piece, right? What Satyajeet was talking about. I've heard, like, we used to say that if you want to bootstrap a startup, you need like 8 to 10 employees. Now the consensus is that it's basically 1 or 2. Where's the other 6? Well, it's the point he was making, where you can automate a lot of things. And as we go into this, you know, cloud-based, compute-based engineering, you know, so the startup I had, we had a whole engineering team. I don't think you need that engineering team. I think you need one person who knows what they're doing, and you can build something pretty cool with it. And that's what's happening at Booth with the New Venture Challenge stuff. Like, student teams are just building everything themselves, right? They're not, so, yeah.
Thank you for the cost. Like, I want to go more on the revenue side or the monetization side. What trends you see now, and what's the change? Because that's where saving is one thing, but making more money is something.
And you want me, so if I have ideas about making money, I should tell you?
So the question, just to repeat the question so the question for people that didn't hear it was, that was the cost argument. What is the revenue side of that story?
That's a tricky one, right? Like, so I've seen, like, things are temporary at this point, right?
Yeah.
So good ideas are actually quite scarce. Like, things work and you're making money, and the next thing you know, OpenAI decides to launch a product that just destroys you, right? So the uncertainty around these things is pretty high. This is why I double down on what Satyajit said. Like, the bets are on like it's always been true that you should come to the table with some IP, some protectable source of differentiating advantage. That's what we teach at Booth also. Now it's even more true. There has to be something that cannot be duplicated. If you don't have that, it can't be code, by the way. Like that ship has sailed, right? And so there's no way it can be code. It can't be algorithms anymore. It has to be something like data, also data that cannot be synthesized, right? Like something truly proprietary, or it has to be something like completely novel that people haven't thought about, right? Like, and that's hard right now. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have other thoughts with it.
Maybe you can put some questions at the back, by the way. Like picking people in front.
Hello.
Yeah.
So, I had a question. With
Someone has.
some of the examples
Oh,
that you were providing, so you mentioned, for instance, the trucking example, and you mentioned the startup example just a couple minutes ago, wherein people can do things with less. In essence, that's saying that there's increasing returns to capital and less returns to labor. Is there a world where that doesn't continue to increase and inequality goes really to the roof? Basically, is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or do you think that this is just going to continue to exacerbate? Let me go back to aristocratic societies the way they were back in the Middle Ages and such.
So just so about the question is like, is there just going to be returns to capital, or are returns to labor just kind of going to die out? Right? I don't think that's true. I think at least history has taught us that there's going to be a period where there's going to be disruption, right? We won't know what the heck is happening, but there's going to be new sources of. So this is a weird analogy, but hopefully this works, right? So I was reading this article about art, and before the camera was invented, art was about depicting reality perfectly, like getting the light right, still life, so you go to museums, there's all like apples and candle lights, right? A lot of that. And then the camera comes along and people are like, art is dead, right? Because now what art is supposed to do? And then you get Impressionism, and you get Post-Impressionism and Modernism, and literally every time a new technology has come out, art, and you can think of art as being generated by human labor. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that it's going to change the way we do things, and we'll do different things, and we'll do things differently. I don't know the answers to that, so your question is spot on. Like, will it look like this, and then up, and then down, and then I don't know what that process will look like. And there are people at Booth studying this. There are people outside Booth studying this, and it's hard to know because the source of that uncertainty is real. I mean, the point that Satyajeet was making, the curve, like we've never seen technology like this ever in the history of humanity, right? So if you plot out electricity, what didn't look like this.
Yeah.
We are exponential on a log scale, like we're exponential. We have never encountered anything like this. So that's why now hence the caveat is that I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. I've been wrong enough times that I just don't know.
So, there's a lot of software companies that have a seat-based pricing model. And I was kind of curious, as you think of AI, right, from a marketing standpoint, from a business standpoint, like what do you think are winning pricing models or emerging pricing models that you think might be winners as more companies adopt AI?
Pricing class now.
Yeah. Can you be more specific? Like what?
Well, I mean, people, you will have a lot of efficiency, so you don't need as many people. So basically, the seat-based pricing model to some extent is obsolete, right? I mean, the number of people using your product will decline over time. So if you're less salespeople, less marketing people, right? So if you're a company like Salesforce, like that's kind of scary.
Right.
So I was just curious that, are there more consumption-based pricing models? Are there more different types of pricing models that would be the winners in this new place?
Yes. So I'll put my JP Dubey hat on. And so I think like this, so JP and I worked on pricing a few times. There's a few themes I'll put forward. Maybe that answers your old school ideas about pricing over time, right? We have two ideas. One is, if you remember this, one is called penetration pricing and this other is called skimming, right? And I think so your horizon matters a lot. So you could imagine that if you truly believe what we are saying, that any of these new AI technologies, like I'm not talking about like truly disruptive ones or new ideas, but regular stuff, if you truly believe that that horizon is short, right, then you harvest as quickly as possible, right? That you skim, you just get as much as you can, and you do markdown pricing quickly, like to extract as much as you want. If, on the other hand, you think, no, you've got something that's really unique and something that's truly different, then we know what you're supposed to do is build up that installed base and slowly raise prices after a point. So that logic still remains. It's just that I don't know the context in which, you would do this. The third thing I think is ubiquitously true now is you will personalize pricing.
Yeah.
Right? That there is no way you don't do that. So there's no one answer. It's going to kind of vary by who your clients are and what they want and what they'll be willing to kind of support. And there's a whole bunch of other things we can talk about with like data and prices, for example. People who share data will get better deals, and those who don't won't. There's a bunch of other things to think about.
All right, we're getting the sign. So this is going to be the last question. So whoever takes it, it has to be good.
Question around solution of AI and robotics intersection.
Ooh, good question.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And how, this blue sky works. So where do you see that? And then connected to that, I'm visualizing that we through a completely different societal and economics models of practically speaking, infinite supply, whether it's services or goods. We're heading to that direction. What does the journey look like? What does it mean on a societal and economic level? So that's the second more complex question.
You want to talk about RD2?
I like I felt like we wanted a good big question. You basically asked, what is the future of society and civilization? Good question.
So take the first one, though. I mean, Google's been doing.
I think, again, I'll sort of caveat with not the expertise, but I think what has happened with robotics is you just see a renewed interest in what's possible, right? Roughly, I think most people that are experts in robotics will tell you sort of the field hit a wall for a while, which is why, sort of industrial robots and stuff made progress, but beyond that, it sort of hit a wall. I think what a lot of these models are now showing is they got to where the state of the art was pretty quickly in an unsupervised way. So there's just a lot of enthusiasm around it, and there's a ton of like research outside and within Google, but also like a whole bunch of companies trying to build humanoid robots, right? So I think I think it's both the thing that looks like a person and walks around and interacts with you, but also, other form factors that do robotic things. So I think if you even abstract if you think about what robots are generally, right now you have a lot of releases of basically LLMs using tools in the real world. Right now, the tools it'll take control of your computer and do things. You can imagine it equally sort of the API call can not just like open your device and change your spreadsheets. It can also like, move your car, right? So I think we're not too far away from that. I think it's dangerous to predict a time, but I think there's enough people working in both sort of focused ways, like this will happen, like to your trucking point, right? If you think of that as a robot, yes, robots will drive around from places. Robots will, there are cars that like, there are robots that, essentially deliver food to you. There are drones that like, come over. So all of those things will continue to sort of improve at that rate. But yeah, I'll pause on the robot question.
No, so I thought he would pitch the Google stuff, but I'll do it.
I'll take that.
So there's
supposed to pitch the Google.
there's this project at Google RD2. They could have called it R2D2, but they didn't call it R2D2. But the idea was to take, so typically when you have robots, you have to kind of code it up to do specific tasks, right? What they did was basically take a language model and a vision model and stick it together. And so now the robot can see and can generalize, right? So the idea would be I can say things like, here's a strawberry, put it in the right place. And the language model helps with inference to understand what that task meant, and then recognizes that there's a bowl of strawberries on the table and puts it in there. That's not an easy task. That earlier you would have to do some mind-blowing kind of coding to get to that. Now you can just seamlessly do it. Now, coupled with that, with other work also at Google, like, so there's this MedParm kind of idea where we train language models on medicine, right? And they've done a test that showed that It's like human doctors are about 95% accurate. The med palm was 96% accurate. Like it's a tie. Talking about where things can go. So now you have a robot that can see and do things. You can extrapolate from that. You've got language models that can be incredibly good at medicine, mush them together. How long before you get a surgeon or a physician who can kind of physically interact with you? I don't know, again, with timelines, I have no idea, but the ideas are all there. The technology is kind of almost there. And at the speed at which things are going, right? We'll be living in utopia or not very quickly.
A lot of these, by the way, right, like this part is as much societal readiness for certain things. Like medicine, I think people, I think there's plenty of, evidence about, systems basically reading. I feel like there's lots of evidence about, hey, a chatbot can answer certain things better than a doctor, but I think none of us would be 100% comfortable switching over to a chatbot at this point. Similarly, same thing with X-rays and stuff like that, right? Which is at some point that will tip, but I think it's society and sort of habits are hard to change.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have autonomous driving yet, only because one accident with an autonomous car gets massive news cycles.
I will say that, were you in San Francisco? So if you, how many people have how many Waymos have you seen in San Francisco at this point? I turned up a street and there was lines and I was that entire street was Waymos. And so I think, stuff, there's the, things change slowly and then they change really fast. I was surprised. I don't go to San Francisco that often, but the last couple of times I've been there, the number of Waymos I've seen has blown me away. Yeah. And then I guess the second part of your question was future of civilization. Yeah. Which is a good place to end, and then we can.
Yeah. Things are going to be awesome.
Yeah. Right. I think with that, Right.
You can bring it up. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, okay. By the time we are getting the setup done, my name is Ajay Manglani. I had the privilege to do what we call the closing remarks. What a turnout, first of all. Thank you. Can we have a big round of applause for ourselves? Yeah. Whenever you come and surround yourself with boothies, I get a feeling, thank God, the world is still rational and orderly. Things haven't changed quite a bit. So I'm very grateful for an amazing talk by Sanjog and Satyajeet. Thank you, Satyajeet, and the Google team for hosting us. More importantly, I have a couple of call outs that I want to have for this group. First one, this is probably the largest turnout after our worldwide boot night, which used to be called, now it's a global boot day. So I want to give a big round of applause to our university team. They're all in the back. I want to give them a big thank you. So thanks for doing that. For those who might not be that familiar with them, I'll just say their names because we all should know them. So you have Jan, who is the newest member. If you have anything related to volunteering programming, reach out to him. Michelle, who leads the region. So anything, good feedback, not so good feedback, reach out to her. We got, let's see, Laura, we got Nick. Anything about give back, hiring, recruiting. If you want to recruit something from Booth, reach out to them. We got Emily here somewhere. We got Anna here. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of people, but one thing about university is that you start to learn when you work as volunteers is it's a massively lean team. And they don't go by okay, for one product, you have one dedicated project manager and all of that. Say they manage the region with these 5-6 people together, and what they can do, it's amazing. So again, thank you very much for hosting us and for organizing this one. So a couple of things. What you are seeing on your screen, I want you to pick up your phone right now, scan this QR code. All right. What's that? No signal. All right. Take a picture. All right. What is it? So this is the Bay Area Chicago booth group on WhatsApp. We are over 370 people here already. This is where all the magic happens, right? And you need to be part of it. If you're not part of it, you're missing probably the best thing. So join about this one. So, you know, what I was thinking, we heard a lot of good things about generative AI at Google headquarters, a lot of growth, etc. And that kind of led for me to think about a couple of things, right? When we were at booth, we learned a little bit about networks, social networks, and macro networks and everything. One thing I learned about, besides many about networks, is the network is only as strong as the links that connect the knots, right? I want all of us to be the strongest links, no matter who we are connected to, how many we are connected to. Is it 5 people, 10 people of boothies that we are connected to? Because this is the network we belong to. And there is a lot of good things. There's a lot of strength in our network. There's a lot of value. So when you leave from here, make sure whoever you are talking to, networking with, you be playing that strongest link role, right? Good thing for me was just coming after a couple of months, I met so many people that I haven't met in years. My classmate, my group mate, Krishna after 6 years. I see Jean after almost a year. Maharaj after 5-6 years. Sandeep after a few weeks, maybe. Khyati, Aparna, Steve. I can keep going on and on, right? This is very important for all of us to be part of that kind of a circle we can always go back to. Be the strongest links, not only with your existing network, but try to create stronger links with the newer network as well, right? So with that said, I have a couple of call to actions and I'll leave us with all of that. Generally, people who have been to similar events and heard me, this is a pretty much standard I give, and I mean it because I do believe in this. I'm going to call your attention for 3 G's, okay? First is gratitude, then is growth, third one is give back. Whenever I see booth or boothies, big gratitude, I feel as like, look, everything that we are doing for one another, the school is doing for us, we are doing for school, vice versa. So my heartfelt thank you to all of you for just being boothy and just doing everything that you are doing. Second is growth. I mean, everything that we listened today, so intellectually enriching, so meaningful. I leave every time a boothy interaction feeling like, I know a little bit more now about a thing or two, right? Almost my IQ level goes up. And then I go out and, the irrational word touches all of us and all of that. So there is a power to that. So leverage this power, help grow not only yourself, but other people. Third most important thing, please give back. And giving back is not just a dollar amount. I mean, frankly speaking, that is probably the lowest thing we can all do, or the bare minimum. Giving back is just being present, what you all did today, just being connecting other boothies. If you want to recruit other boothy graduates, connect with Laura. If you want to give back or know somebody who can add value, talk with Nick to give back. If you want something that the school could be doing, talk to Michelle. Do anything that you want, but be that strongest link. And with that said, enjoy the networking hour. Thanks, everyone.